Kreutzburg was one of the best players in the early days of Brawlhalla, but despite conquering his entire region and qualifying for the World Championships in 2016, he was mysteriously missing from the event, and not soon after, completely disappeared from the scene as a whole. What happened to Kreutzburg? Why did he disappear from Worlds, and why, just 1 year later, did he not even crack the top 8 of the next qualifier? This is the puzzling story of the Brawlhalla pro who vanished. To understand the impact of Kreutzburg's absence, we first have to understand how talented of a player he was. Who was Kreutzburg exactly? What did he mean to the scene? With little to no social media presence and countless hours of footage lost to dead links and defunct websites, we have to put together the image of this mysterious Brawlhalla pro from scattered pieces throughout the internet. Kreutz was one of the best players from Brawlhalla's alpha and beta period all the way to the first World Championships in November of 2016. At the time, the game's early state looked unrecognizable from the current features we've come to accept as given, with the exception of character art and most of the weapon animations. But everything else, hitboxes, jumping, dodging, attack mechanics, defense mechanics, weapon tosses, invincibility, a focus on vertical movement rather than horizontal, and no dash or fast fall. It was literally a different game. Looking at some of this old footage may give the impression that everyone was just slow and bad compared to nowadays, but the reality is the Brawlhalla of today is more like Brawlhalla 2. It requires a completely different skill set from the methodical micro-spacing adjustments and baits of the 2015 to 2016 era. And methodical, intentional, and perfectly positioned play is exactly what Kreutzburg excelled at. He was willing to let the clock tick down, further and further if it meant he could find his spots. A playstyle that would make him quite unpopular in modern Brawlhalla, but that wasn't the case in the old days. Despite his slow, patient approach, one that you might even call extremely passive by today's standards, Kreutzburg was respected and beloved by his fellow competitors. Perhaps it was his positive attitude, his mutual admiration for those he faced, or the fact that his skill was so undeniable. Regardless, Kreutz cemented his place in the book of Brawlhalla legends. Early tier lists from the game place Lucian near the top of the meta, if not the #1 spot, and Kreutzburg was a big reason as to why. His blasters in particular were precise in a way that other players couldn't replicate. Where most people went left, Kreutzburg went up. He was willing to give up control over the map if it meant finding his one single hit, a style that formed perhaps not from choice, but from necessity. That burden is perhaps why Kreutzburg was never the favorite to win every event. That title went to players like Taibo, Foda, or Daiku. Kreutz was always a threat, but one big problem, kept him out of that tippity top player conversation, and we'll get to that soon enough. But first, gamers, I'm gonna level with you. In order to afford the crazy time investment that was uncovering this mystery of Kreutzburg, Egg has got to be nice to his wallet. So welcome to a YouTube ad read. Today we're thanking Raycon for being the sponsor of this video. And before you skip ahead, let me just give you one line to tell you what's up. These are quick charging wireless earbuds with active noise cancellation that refuse to fall out of your ears. At least my ears. I've got weird shaped ears, something about them just makes most earbuds refuse to stay in, but I can say from using these while exercising, Raycons stay locked in there. That's a huge deal for me. Talking about huge deal though, trade offer, huge deal. You get to stop worrying about a Father's Day gift by going to buyraycon.com/eggsoup for 15% off site-wide, and I look a little better to the sponsor who's roped into this ancient story of a 2D Flash game. I have a treadmill in my apartment that I found on the street and lugged up the stairs, and it's great, but this thing is loud. It makes it hard to hear my music or the Yard podcast. So I was very surprised that when I slipped on my Raycons, I could actually hear, like it actually has active noise cancellation even in such a compact fit. And it's got a long battery life too, some 32 hours, so if you do end up buying it for your dad on Father's Day, it'll still work great when he inevitably forgets to charge it. And in a last minute scenario, it can still quick charge to 90 minutes of battery for only 10 minutes plugged in. Good stuff. Check out this case, protective case in the egg colors, beautiful egg colors, look at it now. And once again, check out buyraycon.com/eggsoup for 15% off site-wide. Thank you for sponsoring this video. So what was I talking about? How one big problem kept Kreutzburg out of the top player conversation, and how we'll get to it soon enough. Before that, we need just one more piece of the Kreutzburg puzzle to go over. You see, Kreutzburg himself was an incredible player, but those who were unlucky enough to find themselves across from him on the ranked ladder didn't even have to read his name to still be afraid. For there were 2 letters placed just before that were enough to let you know you were completely and utterly screwed. Clans were a huge deal back in the early days of Brawlhalla, as nearly every single competitive player was a member of a select few. It was how you found your training partners, your community, your team in the frequent crew battle wars run by the community, and maybe most importantly, your closest friends in the scene. Kreutzburg was one of the founding members of Jötunheimer. And quick note, I'm fairly certain it's pronounced Jötunheim, but because people called it Joe, that's what I'll be saying here. It was the first super clan in Brawlhalla's history, at one point single-handedly making up the top 10 players in the game. Joe's dominance lit a fire under the scene and inspired players to rise up and take them down. After all, not everyone had Kreutz's affect and kind attitude, with some in the clan being notorious for trash-talking anyone outside of Jötunheim. It was like their clan was a shield, and even if they lost their matches, if their teammate won, it gave free justification to insult the other players. And so everyone was always looking to take them down. The most acclaimed clan that rose up to defeat Joe was Tech, later becoming Boo, a team whose players would go on to include 2 world champions and Foda, the man most responsible for Brawlhalla esports as we know it. Needless to say, with Joe on his back, Kreutzburg was both a leader and an incredible player. In early 2016, Jötunheim would dissolve for the most part, with the top players splitting off to join Boo or the various other clans that formed in the vacuum, and Kreutzburg was a part of that group. He became a figurehead once again, this time in the South American-centered organization, Excalibur. And therein was his big problem. Yes, Kreutzburg was a South American player, but at the time, Brawlhalla only had servers in the United States. Geographically, he had to connect from just as far as the EU players, but with an even weaker internet infrastructure. It was like he was wearing weights every time he played. There was a silver lining to this connection limitation. Brawlhalla had far fewer players at the time, meaning the strain on these US servers was far lower. Players from EU could actually connect with minimal lag, almost unnoticeable at times. Notice that I said EU though. The South American scene still suffered from massive delay at best and unplayable teleportation at worst. Because of some strange internet magic, the lower Brawlhalla player base meant it was better than the same connection would be today, but still it was far from optimal. Kreutzburg's connection was good enough to compete for a little while, but it sure wasn't good. Lag wasn't his only problem though. In 2025, South America is the best Brawlhalla region in the world, and it's not even close. Not only did they win back-to-back world championships with first and second place being representatives from the region, just this past weekend they won the first LAN of the year as well. But a decade ago, things looked very different. Out of the entire top player pool of some 20 to 50 top level gamers, just 3 were South American: Skroyan, Milo 2391, and Kreutzburg. That meant the level of practice and depth of players they had access to, even if their connection was solid, which it wasn't, was far inferior to North America and Europe. You see, that's the crazy thing about Kreutz. He wasn't from a major region like the players I mentioned previously, and he didn't have the luxury of seamless gameplay that North Americans and even Europeans at the time benefited from. Kreutz competed through intense lag for every single tournament in the early stage of his career, and despite that, still remained one of the top players in the game. That is so unbelievably impressive. And maybe that's why his style was atypical and hyper-defensive. He didn't have a choice. That was the only way he could force out mistakes and react in time. Being a pioneer is always going to come with challenges, and a lack of servers paired with a lack of players were certainly some big ones. So, let's briefly go over what we now know about Kreutzburg. First, he is incredibly mysterious, with only small Reddit threads and comments to go off of. But even so, they are full of praise. 2, he suffered from intense lag for much of his early career due to a lack of servers, but was still competing with the best of the best. And number 3, he had to pioneer the South American scene and grow it alongside his other South American players to even have a chance against the other regions. So with that now established, let's back up a little bit to before Jötunheimer dissolved for one of Kreutzburg's breakout performances. The Jötunheimer vs. Tech crew battle. Community member Raven set up this crew battle between Joe and Tech. Remember those two big teams? A seemingly innocuous challenge that would become a moment the community would remember for months to come. The way crew battles work is slightly different than your typical Brawlhalla game. It's sort of like a Pokemon battle. Each team sends someone out, they battle, and the winning player stays in for the next round, with however many stocks they manage to hold onto. This repeats until one team runs out of players. It creates a very interesting format where preserving your life is critical, as your HP doesn't matter if you can make it to the end of the game. For example, if you end the match with 2 stocks in red, that resets to a full healthy 2 stocks in the next round. So, every single stock matters more than in a typical game. And this goes double in the old versions of Brawlhalla, where everything knocked out much earlier, meaning even one mistake could cost a stock in yellow to orange and cost your team the match. That type of format would be perfectly suited to someone like Kreutzburg, whose ability to hold onto stocks was better than maybe anyone else in the game. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Tech's player lineup started with Daiku, the most acclaimed player in the game thus far, followed by Modern Shu, the first Scarlet Pioneer, then Taibo, the rank #1 player, and finally Yami Sora, an up-and-coming Blasters main. Jötunheimer was set to send out Mancer, an enigma of a player with huge potential, Misfit, a previous rank 1 holder and current sword main, Skroyan, one of the few top South Americans, and Kreutzburg as the anchor. Tech's strategy here was clear. By placing their best players in the front of the lineup, they hoped to overwhelm Jötunheimer and gain such a commanding lead that Yami Sora could easily clean up the rest. And in terms of strategy, they did have Joe beat here. Each player in this battle would have 4 stocks, meaning each team had a total supply of 16. Ideally, you would be taking 4 stocks to break even, but things were immediately looking bad for Jötunheimer after the very first match. Daiku beat Mancer with 1 stock remaining and managed to secure even more against Misfit, taking 5 stocks on his own. Modern Shu stepped in next for Tech and went ballistic. First, he defeated Misfit's 3 stocks, only losing 2 of his own. Skroyan came in next for Joe and looked to cleanly delete Modern Shu and finally put Joe back to even. But Modern Shu was not having it, and despite being down in the orange on his final life against all of Skroyan's 4 stocks, remembering that this was old Brawlhalla and things KO'd much earlier, he still managed to clutch it out and get a KO of his own, holding on to his life for another full minute and bringing Skroyan into the orange before the South American player finally committed to a ground pound and appeared to lag out. With this, Joe now had to make a huge comeback to even have a chance at victory. But with rank #1 Taibo stepping in for Tech next, it was looking completely hopeless. Taibo took 2 stocks from Skroyan, with Skroyan only taking 1, leaving Kreutzburg as the sole remaining player for Jötunheimer, against 7 whole stocks of the other team. Kreutz locked in his trusty Lucian against Taibo's Bodvar, and things went from bad to worse. Taibo may have been the hardest opponent in this entire battle. he's the rank 1 player after all. And even though he was starting out from 1 stock down, the match was fairly even. Kreutz managed to secure the first KO, but he was already in the red. Knowing he had another full player to work through, he began his signature patient style, darting around the Twilight Grove Island and baiting Taibo into throwing out impatient attacks. Perhaps in another setting, Taibo wouldn't have taken the bait. But with tech already so far ahead, he let his guard down for just a moment, and Kreutz jumped at the opportunity. Kreutzburg, despite being in the red, took the second stock in a row with a rare high-risk signature play, putting his team back in contention. While Taibo did secure the next stock quickly, Kreutz kicked into another gear. He brought Taibo all the way to KO %, only being hit a few times himself, while his teammates in the chat were losing their minds. "Kreutz will save us," Skroyan notably remarked, but unfortunately for her and for Jötunheimer as a whole, Taibo also started to lock in. Hammer hit after hammer hit, uncontested until Kreutz was also just a flick away from the blast zone. After dodging a close hammer ground pound, Kreutz went for a risky walk-off guitar nair to stuff Taibo's recovery, but he was just a couple frames too slow. And you can tell this because the sound effect actually came out, but the hitbox did not.
Isn't able to find the knockout that he needs. What is happening? There's the hit, sending Lucian over the edge. And there's the knockout from Taibo.
And unfortunately for Jötunheimer, Kreutz fell down to 2 stocks. It didn't take long for him to clean up Taibo after this, but the damage was done. He needed to preserve that life. Kreutzburg now had to take 4 stocks from fellow Blasters player Yamisora before losing just 2 of his own, and as the final match began, Taibo's clutch in the previous game proved even more important. Yamisora and Kreutz traded blows in the first stock of the match, and while Kreutz did take it first, he was already in the red. With Yamisora weaving underneath Kreutzburg's horizontal spacing, the game was now a completely untouched 3-1 stock game. So, with his team on his back, Kreutz buckled in. He started a new strategy, using Lucian's Blaster's downsig to lift him into the air and create a wall with Blaster Sair on the high ground, forcing Yamisora to engage from a disadvantageous position. Both players had access to an unfair amount of range, meaning Kreutz had to beat Yamisora with the exact same tools, but 3 times the efficiency. But he was doing it. Outspacing Yamisora's own blasters, Kreutz found a clutch reversal with Lucian's sidesig and secured the next KO. Yamisora, recognizing the pressure of the moment, opted to swap to sword next, which forced Kreutz to switch up his game plan completely. Now it was a cat and mouse game, with Kreutz looking to put as much distance between them as possible. Yamisora kept finding hits underneath with sword recovery and began dodging in from the ground to get through the blaster's wall with a bunch of invincibility. Remember, as I keep pointing out, this is old Brawlhalla. Your horizontal options were limited, but you could also use an invincible dodge from any position. This was a risky play from Yamisora, as dodge was your only real defensive tool, but it paid off and brought Kreutz to the red. Kreutz found yet another clutch side signature, this time reading Yamisora's invincible approach, and brought it down to a last stock game. Yamisora, though, kept pushing, and with a fresh stock landed a ground pound that appeared to KO Kreutz. But he held on. Kreutzburg reversed the situation, bringing Yamisora to orange. Just one mistake away from being knocked out himself, Kreutz was unafraid to enter the spacing war, and intelligently traded blows with Yamisora while staying as far to the right side of the platform as he could. That way, even if he got hit, the odds of him being knocked out were lower. And Kreutzburg was fighting back. Kreutzburg has almost
evened up this match, but he's in a bad position now. Is Yamisora going to chase him off the ledge? Oh, he just misses it. Kreutzburg playing so safely. Oh, he goes for the risky option. He's going underneath. Kreutzburg just barely recovering on the left side. Searching for a ground pound, not able to find it. Both players are at red right now. Oh, he gets the hit, and it finishes! Yamisora takes it!
Perhaps a misinput. A result of lag or a momentary lapse in concentration after playing so carefully for so long, Kreutz went for a blaster's nair instead of a side air on the edge, and Yamisora, with an all-or-nothing signature attack, finally took Kreutzburg's final stock, and with it, the victory over Jötunheimer. Yes, Joe lost this battle, but if any individual player came out a winner, it was Kreutz. He was the only player on his team to survive through a full round, the only one to take more than 4 stocks, and the single player on both teams with the most number of knockouts. That was probably the best battle I've seen in a while, one commenter said. Modern Shu was a pivotal heavy hitter, but I have to say that Kreutzburg was the clear MVP of either crew. In terms of production value alone, Kreutz brought more hype to Brawlhalla than I've seen in a while, and with camping no less. Kreutz had made a name for himself as the most clutch player in the scene, held back only by his connection. But that was about to change. In February of 2016, Brawlhalla finally launched their Brazilian servers, a decision that would go on to permanently alter the course of the game over the next decade. But the early pioneer players, of course, would have no way of knowing this. They, for lack of better word, were just happy. For a group that had only known lag, this was a joyous day.
Oh my god, guys, are you seeing this? I'm fast! Woohoo!
Alongside the launch of the new servers was another crazy announcement just a month prior. While every Brawlhalla tournament thus far was run solely by the community, starting in 2016, Blue Mammoth Games themselves would host a full year of officially supported tournaments, culminating in the first ever World Championship at the very end. An in-person event titled BCX with a $50,000 prize pool. Now, keep in mind, players up to this point were competing for Dark Age Orion skins and a Salt Shaker taunt. $50,000, which at the time also translated to 200,000 Brazilian real. That was unbelievable. Not just for Brawlhalla, but for any fighting game, especially one that had still yet to fully launch. This demonstrated how much Brawlhalla believed in their competitive scene, how willing they were to foster its growth, and also gave a massive goal for Kreutzburg to work towards. Everything in 2016 was preparation for Worlds, and he was not going to let this chance slip. Unfortunately for Kreutz, and for South America as a whole, that year-long stretch of official Brawlhalla tournaments with sizable prize pools, this is something we'll get into later, but we're talking 21 weeks of $1,000 prize pools each, that did not extend to South America, nor Southeast Asia or Australia. The regions were simply too small to afford putting up that much money. NA and EU were already stacked regions with intense competition, but like I alluded to earlier, South America had a long way to go. So, the new clan Excalibur entered the time chamber. Kreutz and Skroyan recruited up-and-coming South American players, many of which had playstyles previously hampered by lag. This meant on the new Brazilian servers they could finally realize their potential if only given a shot, and Excalibur was exactly that shot. As the first real competitive-focused South American clan, members of Excalibur, Kreutz and Skroyan included to be frank, were finally given a space to hone their skills efficiently. In-houses, mentoring, gameplay reviews, and of course lag-free sparring sessions for the first time boosted the skills of South America up rapidly. Of course, they were still well behind NA and EU in terms of depth, but that was to be expected. Those regions had nearly a full year of experience as a head start. But the question always lingered in people's minds. Yes, there were a greater number of good players in the bigger regions, but what about the top of South America? Could an unrestricted Kreutzburg compete equally with the best of the best? After all, he was taking some events while his weights were still on. The world would not find the answer to this question for a long time. Brawlhalla hosted Final Round as the first official Brawlhalla LAN tournament in March of 2016, to unanimous excitement from the community. They'd actually have an in-person bracket for the first time ever, and it was yet another stepping stone towards the grand storyline of BCX. However, this was not necessarily a big day for the South American scene, as no South American player nor Southeast Asian or Australian would attend the event. Financially, it just didn't seem feasible to travel all the way to the United States for it. So, South America still trained in secret, hosting their own tournaments with some support from BMG. We're talking minimal prizes of in-game items, but mostly on their own. That appeared to be the harsh reality, the only way a South American could even hope to enter a tournament as another month went by. Some community members ran a short circuit titled the Brawlhalla Championship Series. This would be a 4-week event ending with a grand finals tournament the final weekend, featuring the best of the best players from each week prior, and a $1,000 prize pool supplied by BMG themselves. Technically, this tournament was open to every region, but it was completely dominated by NA and EU. After all, it was hosted on the US servers. South America was left unattended to. Forgotten, in a way. Their scene was too small for Brawlhalla to hedge the already risky esports bet on them, too. But the players made up for their lack of numbers with pure, authentic passion. While Kreutz was disconnected from the official tournament scene geographically, he made sure to stay connected via the community. At the time, the Brawlhalla subreddit was the primary place of contact. It worked very, very differently from today. You'd throw up a post saying, "I hit platinum, I hit diamond," and then you'd be flooded with the core members of the community congratulating you, remarking on how they queued into you and how well you played to get there. You'd see Daiku, you'd see Milo, and Kreutzburg was one of those core members. User Sojiroshi posted a Hattori montage, and Kreutz was right there in the comments. The stairway to heaven is there again. I said it, man. This was the golden age of anyone and everyone creating Brawlhalla montages, and a big reason why was the direct support from the community. On player Zoro's video, Kreutzburg again. This music, those plays, so good. And on Fadden's, godlike edit. He'd encourage artists in the community to keep posting. Good stuff, I got this, Thatch hype. And he'd encourage the rest of the scene to remain positive and combat toxicity wherever they could. We don't need enemies when we can just make friends. Plus, we must keep in mind that we are all here for one purpose: to have fun. Well then, isn't it a better idea to spread good attitude so it can turn back to us? Yeah, totally. Beyond supportive words, Kreutzburg also supported the growth of the game. Part of the reason Brawlhalla developed the way it did was from his contributions. An in-depth look at how the throw nerf affected each weapon saw Kreutz recommending weapon throw stun be changed based on distance traveled, which ended up making it into the game. Quality of life features, you tell us, a post from the Brawlhalla devs themselves. Kreutzburg is in the comments requesting a feature that still has yet to be added. The BMG please. And in a separate post, asked for info about who was the winner-loser in replays. Clearly, Kreutzburg cared a lot about the game, about bolstering the resources that can help you improve, and about spreading positivity throughout the community. I do want to say, these contributions and attitudes extended beyond Kreutz. Skroyan and Milo too were famous for being kind-hearted and passionate members of the community. In doing research for this video, I found one of Skroyan's old montage uploads. It's a standard video, but scroll down into the comments and she's replying to every single person that asked a question or wrote a reaction. And check this one out. Valfar the Dragon Knight, Skroyan's full concept for a legend and brand new weapon, Greatsword, over 4 years before Greatsword got added into the game. I mean, just look at how much work she put into this. There's attack outlines, poses, and animation suggestions drawn by community member Chewy QWERTY, a lore section, a feedback document, and a full breakdown in Google Docs. And Milo is also right there in the comments. This is so well done. I have no words to describe how awesome this concept is. This unyielding support went extra for their own community. Since Brawlhalla wasn't running $1,000 tournaments for them, Skroyan and Kreutzburg took it into their own hands. The time has come for the first really big South American 1v1 tournament. We have talented players in the South America region, and for the ones that are curious, this will be a good opportunity to see how the competitive scene is going in our server. I hope you all have fun and enjoy playing and watching. The comments summed up the general community consensus pretty well. It was a surprise, but nonetheless people were excited. I didn't know that Brazil has tournaments. Just hit platinum today, but I think I'm gonna try. Cool beans, I'm all signed up and ready to suck. Of course, Kreutzburg endorsed it himself too by saying, it's time to see some of the most skilled South American players in action. We have veterans from closed beta and promising newcomers. This will definitely be good. And I'll be there. Brawltalha number 3 would live up to its promise and feature a staggering 116 players, unheard of for South America at the time. Kreutz, of course, was the number 1 seed and tore through the entire bracket. 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, and a 2-1 over fellow Excalibur member Ace to enter winner semifinals. 2-0 over rival clan Def's representative Pepe Lagali for winners finals, where he was set to face Excalibur's Doritos Boy. Doritos Boy was the winner of the previous Brawltalha tournaments, and a long-legacied player that would go on to be a top South American threat for years. Kreutz. Well, Kreutz swiftly defeated him 3-0, and with this he made it to grand finals where he'd face I'm Magical and cleanly 3-0 them as well. Don't be mistaken, Kreutzburg was a very kind and supportive community member, but if you faced him in bracket, you best be afraid. He was an absolute monster and crushed his entire region in their biggest tournament to date. So let's back up a second once again and reacclimate ourselves with what we know. Kreutzburg was one of the earliest Brawlhalla pros who, despite external circumstances holding him back, still strived to improve himself and bring up his own community. He offered key insights into how the game could be improved, and helped train the newest generation of South American players, while also completely destroying them when the time called for it. Kreutzburg had a dream to build up the Brawlhalla scene, and more specifically, to build up South America. He wanted nothing more than for them to be taken seriously, and maybe eventually even win the World Championships itself. He knew they were far away from the juggernauts that were NA and EU, but with enough hard work, enough effort, enough positive encouragement, perhaps that dream would one day come true. Little did Kreutz know, that dream was about to be closer than ever. Kreutzburg yearned to attend BCX, but much like Final Round earlier in the year, LAN was simply not an option. But when Foda, a man famous for his support of South America, was hired as Brawlhalla's first ever esports director, the chance started to appear. On a Reddit AMA, Kreutzburg asked Foda, "Do you know if players from Brazil will be invited for the upcoming Brawlhalla World Championships? If yes, do you have any idea of how many? Thanks." To which Foda responded, "Not confirmed, but I think at least one player will come from Brazil region and SEA. It wouldn't be a world championship without the best players from all over the world." This gave Kreutz some hope, which would soon be answered. Because of the success of that Brawlhalla Championship series earlier in the year, and Foda now at the esports helm, Brawlhalla surprise dropped an announcement for a new iteration of the Brawlhalla Championship series. This BCS, it was called, would run for 21 weeks starting in June and concluding with BCX in November. The majority of these tournaments would be alternating North America and Europe 1v1 and 2v2, but 6 special tournaments were reserved for each of the 6 regions. These were the regional qualifiers, that thing Foda hinted at before. The winners of these regional qualifiers would be flown out and housed at BCX for free, while also being granted unique VIP access to the event. Suddenly, Kreutz's dream seemed like it could come true. Brazilian Brawlhalla and South American Brawlhalla at large was still a big mystery to the rest of the scene. Most players had never even watched a South American player, much less a full tournament. The general skill level was unknown, and most importantly, the skill level of the best player was too. And that's a big deal because the best player would now be guaranteed a spot at Worlds. The date for South America's regional qualifier was set. August 6, 2016, just a few months before Worlds was set to take place. That would be Kreutzburg's first time truly in the spotlight. It was going to be the highest pressure moment of his career. Would he snatch it, or would he crumble in the heat of the moment? Kreutz had some time to prepare. He knew his rivals were improving quickly and needed to step up himself. With the release of Brawlhalla, Kreutzburg swapped off his signature Lucian and locked in this more stable pick. Brawlhalla's greater defense meant Kreutz could afford to make 1 or 2 more mistakes per stock, and for someone whose gameplay style was centered around making as few mistakes as possible, this seemed like a perfect fit. But the change wasn't purely positive, as it meant he also had to learn a brand new weapon: the axe. Axe is almost the polar opposite of Katars, Lucian's alternate option, as Katars thrive on quick low damage hits, and Axe is all about the big swings. South America's qualifier was 7 weeks away, and while 7 weeks may seem like a lot, the time quickly catches up when you realize you can't just get better. That's not enough. You need to get better faster than everyone else gets better. But Kreutzburg remained positive, excited even. It seemed like the pressure wasn't affecting him at all. After the first week of BCS, Kreutz commented on the summary post, "This is so exciting. I can't wait for Brazil qualifiers. I'll do my best to get a place for BCX." Perhaps that attitude is what helped circumvent the nerves of playing with your ticket on the line, as August rolled around and Kreutzburg began his tear through the South American regional qualifier bracket. With a 2-0 against Vispo to start his run, Kreutz found himself face to face with Skroyan in the next round. An Excalibur team kill and a matchup of titans, this would set the stage for the rest of his tournament run. An opponent of Skroyan's caliber this early only spoke to the intense development of the South American scene over the past 8 months. And lucky for the rest of us, it would also be the first time Kreutz ever appeared on an official tournament stream. The match started off with Skroyan locking in her trusty Orion and Kreutz on Diana. That may sound surprising for the Brawlhalla discussion we had earlier, but it seemed like he was saving that legend for when it mattered most. Plus, the slower axe against Skroyan's methodical playstyle would perhaps not fare very well. Bow was a newer weapon release, so against someone as careful as Skroyan, perhaps she had not adjusted to the spacing required to combat it, and Kreutz would be able to sneak in a hit in a critical moment. This would prove to be a battle of patience. Who would blink first? As 30 seconds into the match went by with barely any hits on either side, and over 2 full minutes before Kreutz was able to take the first stock. This set really demonstrated and exemplified these new chase dodge mechanics, where with enough momentum, you were able to charge an opponent with an invincible approach option. Unlike modern Brawlhalla that has dashes and its chase dodges only happen after hitting an opponent, you could do these at any time. Most players use the chase dodge to close the distance with their opponent, but these two demonstrated how it could be utilized for the opposite, putting distance between the two and adjusting ever so slightly to secure your one crucial hit. The clock ticked down to 2 minutes left, with Kreutz noticeably behind Skroyan. A huge side sig almost knocked out Kreutzburg, but 5 unanswered hits and the match was now in his control. With 20 seconds left before going to sudden death, and Skroyan trying her best to stall just to reset and make it even again, Kreutzburg went for a risky, uncharacteristic offstage push, going for 2 bow reads and landing the second one to secure game number 1 with just 13 seconds remaining on the clock. That was the critical moment. Skroyan made one small mistake in Bow's timing because it was a newer weapon, and Kreutz seized the opportunity. Skroyan swapped over to Bryn for game number 2, with much of the same brand of gameplay from these two players. 2 minutes in before Kreutz took the first stock, and the patience from these players extended the set well beyond your typical gameplay. By the last stock KO scenario, both Kreutz and Skroyan had effectively played 4 games worth of time. But a quick side sig wake up against Skroyan's attempt to combo extend secured game number 2 and the set for Kreutzburg. After that gauntlet that felt way more intense than a simple 2-0, he would now move on to top 16 to face Hattori player Creeds. Kreutz locked in eggsoup.
What?
Merging his Brawlhalla experience with the Diana in the previous set, and shockingly foregoing his signature blasters to beat this rival clan member. Once again, it was a slower paced game than North American and European fans were accustomed to. While much of this first game showed Kreutz spacing out Creeds with his bow, it was the axe and likely the confidence gained from practicing Brawlhalla that secured him game number 1. Kreutz swapped over to Asuri, thinking the quick-hitting Katars would be able to get into Azoth's range, and this proved to be the correct pick. Kreutz completely overwhelmed Kreutzburg and began running away with the game. Down to his final stock, Kreutzburg locked in to his infamous clutch mode, landing blow after blow after blow. But the lead was just ever so slightly too far in Kreutz' favor, and a downward movement read allowed Kreutz to win Game 2. This was Kreutzburg's first loss in the tournament, and perhaps the wake-up call he needed to truly awaken. Game 2 was close, with just 4 damage separating the two players, and while I'm sure he hoped he could have kept the Barraza a secret for longer, Kreutzburg did not want to take the risk. Playstyle and personality perhaps aligned in that way. Game 3 began, and the audience got their first glimpse of Kreutzburg's true pick, Barraza. If his Azoth was able to duke it out evenly, his Barraza should surely take this without worry. And that's exactly what happened. His blasters went on an absolute tear, bringing Kreutz to KO % before long, and made it trivial for his axe to clean it up. Barraza's high defense allowed Kreutzburg to survive some would-be knockouts and extend his stock for another full minute, bringing Kreutz to the orange. After which, it was business as usual, and Kreutzburg took the game and the set barely damaged on his final stock. Kreutz did show some comeback potential with a reversal attempt off stage, but Kreutzburg's careful movement would not allow him to fall for such a trick, and he was moving on to top 8 on the winner's side. There he would find none other than Milo2391, and this time he was not playing around. Kreutz selected Barraza immediately for Game 1, and despite Milo actually securing the first knockout of the game and landing a bunch of damage afterwards, it didn't take long for Kreutz to adapt. He not only took Milo's first stock back, he lapped him in damage and secured the second one. By the time the clock ticked down to 3 minutes, Milo was 1 hit away and Kreutz was sitting comfortably on his last stock. A late frame ground pound interrupted Milo's chase dodge attempt back on stage, and Game 1 went to Kreutz. Game 2 went much the same. Milo took the first stock, got a ton of damage, but Kreutz slowly chipped away at the lead and stole the stock advantage back. Milo visibly frustrated at this point, and understandably so, as each of his attempts to approach Kreutz were entirely stuffed out by his axe, only landed 1 hit and a weapon toss before charging up a signature and just accepting his fate. Kreutzburg had beaten Milo mentally, and it appeared he had given up. But can you even blame him? Not really. Take a look at how crazy Brawlhalla's vertical spacing and escape game was at the time. Kreutzburg attempted to break neutral with a side sig. Milo's spacing was just barely off, and within half a second, Kreutz was at the top of the screen. When I tell you it was like a different game entirely, you see what I mean. Brawlhalla was very difficult. As was Kreutzburg's path to winning this esteemed ticket to Worlds, as fellow Excalibur member Kotsuo was waiting for him in Winners Finals. Once again, Kreutz started off with Barraza, and his axe showed its worth. Less than a minute, and Kotsuo's first stock was gone. Kreutz's fastest performance thus far. Hit after hit after hit, and Kotsuo was now in KO % again. Going for a risky read on Kreutzburg's inward movement, Kotsuo attempted a chase dodge downlight, which would have a ton of invincibility frames and completely stuff out any of Kreutz's options. That is, unless Kreutz went for a signature, which would be the only move to counter the invincibility directly. Again, a very different Brawlhalla with invincible attacks and high-risk signature counters. There was a rock, paper, scissors element to the attack options, and Kreutz guessed correctly here. His blasters were dominant in the second half of the match, and a downsig read KO'd Kotsuo in orange to win Game 1. What's most surprising is the damage was nearly even between the two players, but Kreutz had a full stock lead, indicating his crazy ability to hold onto his lives. Game 2 played out much the same way, with Kreutzburg alternating between axe and blasters to wall out Kotsuo, and land some key reads to secure the match. Normally, this would be the end of the set, but as the tournament had reached Winners Finals now, Kreutz would still have to win one more game. And Kotsuo was not going down without a fight. The Game 3 Koji swap seemed desperate to some, But with Bow's quick aerial attacks and its ability to get into the diagonal angles that blasters tend to struggle against, Kotsuo actually took the first stock. This game was more even than ever before, and Kotsuo knew he had to take a risk if he wanted to win. Reading Kreutz landing instead of stopping on the platform or throwing out a counterattack, Kotsuo went for an all-or-nothing downlight and got it, taking Kreutz's second stock and his first big lead in the entire set. It seemed like Kreutzburg just didn't have an answer to Kotsuo's bow. The very reason why it may have been so effective against Skroyan appeared to also give Kreutz the same trouble. Yes, the weapon had been out since late 2015, but Gauntlets had taken the spotlight completely, as June's drop of Core led many to flock to the newest shiny object and forego bow entirely. Kreutz did not have a full year of practice against it like he did the original set of weapons. Or perhaps he did and Kotsuo was just that proficient. Regardless, the blasters were helpless against Kotsuo's bow, and Game 3 went in favor of the Koji, with all the momentum on his side. Kreutz, needless to say, was not pleased. His axe was doing fine, but the blasters seemed completely countered by Bow's diagonals. So, for Game 4, his selection changed to Brynn. Maybe it was her higher speed, maybe just a rush of adrenaline after losing the previous game. But Kreutz started this game on fire. 6 axe hits in a row chopped up Kotsuo's first stock, and it looked like the king was back. Kotsuo rebutted with a bow 3-piece, but Kreutzburg's vertical spacing was immaculate, and he took Kotsuo down to his final stock before even losing his first. At this point, Kreutz was dialed in. Whether it was a stylistic change, a burst of confidence, or just complete player adaptation, Kreutzburg appeared unstoppable. Kotsuo found himself in the orange on his final stock before finally securing Kreutzburg first, and all it took was a few hits and a ground pound read for Kreutz to move on to the grand finals of the South American Regional Qualifier. Kreutzburg's opponent was on a run of his own. Noe fell to Kotsuo 2-0 earlier in bracket and began a loser's bracket pair. He won 5 sets in a row, including a 2-0 over Milo and the revenge 3-1 over Kotsuo himself. Now, this core main would face his greatest challenge yet, but the feeling was mutual. I briefly mentioned core earlier, but now is really the time to explain just how insane gauntlets were in its early state. Where most weapons excelled in the vertical game and loved to keep you pinned down below, gauntlets were the only weapon that could actually send you downward from nearly any position. The neutral air grabbed you from above to send you down. The side air punched you horizontally and sent you down. And the down air, if you can believe it, sent you down. This, paired with a rapid steering ground pound and efficient combo tools, made the weapon a complete menace to fight. So much so that bow mostly fell out of favor despite its fluid movement and solid game plan. However, those strengths were also a curse. Because gauntlets were so different from everything else, it took a particular type of player, a new approach to the game, in order for them to reach their maximum potential. It's not a surprise that Noe was the only one to reach these heights yet. The weapon came out less than 2 months ago. Kreutzburg's style would have to change once again. Locking in Bow himself, believing in its ability to outspeed gauntlets, Kreutz brought back his Azoth for game number 1 of Grand Finals. But Noe did something nobody expected. He tried to counter the counterpick. Cassidy was Noe's legend of choice, and this was a huge mistake. Kreutz had beaten Milo, the hammer expert, earlier in this tournament, and nobody knew blasters better than Kreutz. Game 1 was mostly a stomp, and Kreutz was now just 2 matches away from reaching his dream. Kreutz locked in Brynn immediately, anticipating the core swap, and Noe answered his call. It took Noe some time to actually find the gauntlets, but upon equipping them, it was just 2 janky ground pounds and Kreutz's first stock was gone. Noe started running away with the game, and by the time the clock reached 4 minutes, Kreutz was orange on his last stock. He had no answers. Noe was locked in. And no matter what Kreutz tried, he could not find a solution against these gauntlets. Kreutz tried clawing his way back, with shades of his match against Taibo beginning to shine through. But this time, it wasn't enough. Noe found a hammer nair to send the Brynn flying, and now with the set even, Kreutz was at a crossroads. Azov was not going to do it. He knew as much, and his spear proficiency was simply not at the level to beat Noe's gauntlets. Kreutz needed something. He needed to change something fundamental. Noe was a complete player counter, and Kreutzburg had no certain path forward. What was a player that had cemented his entire legacy on certainty, on running down the clock until he could secure his one hit, on taking as few risks as humanly possible? What was a player like that supposed to do? With his dream within reach, Kreutzburg took a risk. The Barraza that had gotten him this far was going to be his pick to bring him to the finish line no matter what. Yes, gauntlets had a great matchup into blasters on paper, and yes, Noe was already destroying him with gauntlets, and this would give him even more chances. But if Kreutz could forget about this dream for just a second, forget about the overwhelming pressure he must have been feeling here, sitting finally in grand finals in the biggest match of his career against an opponent he had no answer against. If he could do that, if he could believe not in any matchup chart or any theoretical win condition, but instead in himself, maybe it was possible. In this moment, the most important in his career, perhaps he could remember his own words. We must keep in mind that we are all here for one purpose: to have fun.
No transition. Where we saw that sleep. With this down tickles his beard just a little bit. Oh!
Kreutzburg, trying to stuff out Noe's recovery, jumped ever so slightly too high and activated the mine on the platform rather than sending it through, and launched himself to the top of the map. For a player so methodical, so careful to make that kind of mistake, to take that risk in the first place, you would think it's over. The game plan is gone, their mental is shattered, but for Kreutzburg, it was somehow the opposite. This is what he needed, maybe the only thing that he needed. Picking up a mine in grand finals against his biggest counter yet and duffing the play completely. Kreutzburg was not playing for a ticket. He was not playing for his VIP status, his dream for South America to one day win in Worlds. He was playing for fun. Kreutzburg picked up another mine immediately after and baited Noe into a panic chase dodge to avoid any kind of knockout move. But this setup was carefully crafted and Noe ended up dodging into the mine itself. Despite Kreutzburg's huge mistake, the game was now fully even up. Blow after blow after blow, Kreutz and Noe kept trading. Both players held on to their second stocks for what felt like ages, with Noe getting it first off an unarmed neutral air. But on-stage ground pound from Kreutz evened it back up, and the game was reset. Last stock. And here, Noe's hammer finally awakened, and Kreutz found himself way behind. If we know one thing about Kreutz though, it's that he never backs down. Grabbing himself his trusty blasters, the weapon he kept close for years, he brought himself back into the game. They were reaching the final clutch moments, the moments where Kreutzburg thrives. He's going to let the clock tick down. He's going to wait you out. That must be what Noe was ready for. Kreutzburg began taking the game into his own hands, walling out Noe with the blasters and immediately evading Noe's mine. He was playing high risk, sitting right next to this active explosive while knowing all it would take is one hit from Noe to launch him into it and go down another game. But Kreutz stuffed out every option, tracked Noe down, and guaranteed himself an axe side air to go up 2-1. 3-1. The last minute of this game was entirely in Kreutzburg's control, and now there was only one game left between him and Worlds. And this is where something weird happened. Maybe the pressure of the moment. A complete switch in mentality that Kreutzburg appeared to present. The last stretch of gameplay that left him feeling hopeless. Whatever it was, Noe decided against the core. And Kreutz took this opportunity like he's never taken anything before. Blasters v Blasters went in Kreutz's favor to give him a slight edge, and Axe Recovery got him the first stock. Now the wall began, and Kreutzburg's Blasters once again proved their clutch factor. Noe, the player that not 10 minutes ago made Kreutzburg look hopeless, forced him to soul search, was now doing some searching of his own. Kreutzburg was like a new player, reading Noe's invincible chase dodge approach and countering with a barrage of Blasters and Sig. He was now one stock away from Worlds, and with a full life lead, nothing was going to get in his way again. After building up a ludicrous amount of damage on Noe's last stock, slipping underneath the rising side platform to counter Noe's chase dodge approach once again, and dealing 631 damage in the match, it was Axe Downlight that got Kreutzburg the final KO of the tournament. Kreutzburg had done it. He had proven himself as the best in South America. Even when seemingly countered completely, he dug his heels in and pushed his level even further. It took breaking down his own barriers, questioning the very style that had gotten him this far in the first place. But he won. Kreutz won his entry into Worlds and was ready to once again put his region on his back. So let's zoom out for just a moment and examine what exactly unfolded in this region. Most obviously, the top 3 of the qualifier were all members of Excalibur, a testament to how impactful the training of these players was. Kreutzburg, of course, being the torchbearer for them all. It was almost like the golden days of Joe. Excalibur had no insignificant part in developing the South American scene from the ground up, and through their camaraderie created a monster of a clan. But even players outside of Excalibur were rallying behind Kreutz. I loved attending the qualifier. Unfortunately, I couldn't pass the semifinals, but a great friend will represent us. Congratulations, Kreutz, we are with you. It seemed impossible to hate Kreutzburg. His method of playing, now seen by the rest of the world, was certainly unpopular. But with a community behind him with such unyielding support, one he helped build from scratch, you couldn't help but root for him. Plus, he probably sent a nice message supporting you at some point too. The rest of the world was now hotly anticipating how Kreutzburg would perform against their own top players. After all, he had proven himself capable in the past with atrocious lag, and he just proved his ability to adapt in the most important moments. How was BCX going to pan out? How would he do against the other regions? How about we explore those other regions for just a moment then, to get a sense of the scene. Specifically, the other 5 regional qualifiers. The list was composed of LDZ from US West, eggsoup from US East, that's me, Maltimum from EU, Tiger from SEA, and finally Kyler Alice from Australia. That's a lot of names, but the important ones right now are Tiger and Kyler Alice, as they were in a nearly identical situation to Kreutzburg. They were both from smaller regions, both soared above their fellow competitors, and both seemed to be around the same level as NA and EU, but without a chance to prove it.
They were easily the biggest wild cards coming into this. There were plenty of people predicting both ways, that, oh, they'd be really strong, or oh, they'd be really weak. Because you can't really tell. It's not like they'd really fought any of the NA players. Closest we'd gotten to that was, eggsoup went over to SEA for a couple weeks for vacation and fought Tiger.
Okay, I actually totally forgot about this before researching this video, but that's true. I was visiting my grandma for a couple weeks, and because of that, I could play against Tiger on the SEA servers, and that was the first and I believe only time anyone from NA or EU really competed against a member of this trio. So I actually have a little unique insight here. As you now know, these players were a mystery to the whole scene, so after playing against Tiger, I could report back, yeah, he is amazing. He is a phenomenal player, and definitely someone you won't want to face in bracket. It's a tiny little foreshadowing there. Fun fact, he actually helped me warm up on the first day of BCX as well. I finally got to meet him in person, so shout out Tiger. Thanks for playing with me. Alright, back to the video. Fans were excited to see LDZ compete against Daiku on even ground, the big names, of course. But the even bigger question mark was these three players. Tiger, Kyler Alice, Kreutzburg. Everyone wanted to see them. Everyone wanted to find out just how good they really were.
That was one of the biggest questions, arguably, before going into BCX, is are they really that good?
They spearheaded one of the most hype narratives going into the event. Like Foda said, it wouldn't be a world championship without the best players from all around the world. And the decision to include these regional qualifiers in the event paid off more than anyone ever could have expected. At Worlds that November, Kyler Alice, the Australian representative, went on a loser's bracket tear and took the eventual 2v2 champion Daiku to last game, last stock, last hit, in one of the most hype sets of the entire tournament.
Probably one of the most intense 1v1s I've seen in a long time. Everyone not knowing who to root for.
I mean, it came down to the last hit. Game 3, last stock, red health, and Kyler Alice made one small ground pound mistake, and that killed him. But Kyler Alice could have taken out Daiku.
He ended in 9th place, a fantastic showing for the World Championships. Tiger from SEA made it all the way to winner side of top 16. Falling only to Multimum and eggsoup, and also earning a 9th place finish. The rest of the regional qualifiers too performed incredibly. I, as the US East qualifier, ended in 4th. Multimum, the EU qualifier, got 2nd. And LDZ, US West representative, won the entire thing with a commanding 1st place championship. The regional qualifiers tore up the bracket, taking name after name after name to end up at the very top of the podium. But one player from that group was missing. The only qualifier that was not broadcast on stream. The only one whose gameplay was still a mystery. Where in the world was Kreutzburg? Well, he didn't appear to be there on day 0 when all the other players landed in Atlanta, met up with each other, and got accustomed to the hotel and venue. He didn't appear to be there on day 1 either when the 1v1 and 2v2 brackets were officially starting. This was do or die, truly, and nobody had heard from him directly. The brackets began with the pools phase in the morning. Basically, there were enough competitors to where they would have to split play into separate phases of players. First up were pools A1, A2, and A3, which would happen simultaneously. The number 1 seed LDZ was in pool A1, for example. As a regional qualifier, Kreutzburg was one of the top seeds, meaning he was slated to play in Pool B1, the second phase of the day. But as the A pools wrapped up, he was still nowhere to be found. If Kreutzburg was somehow hiding somewhere in the venue, nobody could really get into contact with him. The hope was that he was simply in another country without data or service and he couldn't message anyone. Perhaps a small language barrier meant he wasn't fully aware of the time he was supposed to play. That was the hope. The fear was that for some reason, the beloved South American qualifier was not making it to Worlds. This remained a mystery as the day progressed, with his bracket being delayed as long as feasible. After all, a regional qualifier getting disqualified would be a terrible turn of events for Brawlhalla and for the fans. But eventually, some internet detectives were able to find some information. You see, the brackets started on Saturday morning. Ideally, you would land at the event on Thursday or Friday, as you were supposed to check in the day before the tournament. But one user on the Brawlhalla subreddit posted a photo at the airport saying they missed their morning flight and still hoped to make it before that check-in. And lo and behold, there was Kreutzburg. At 7:02 a.m. Eastern Time, the Friday of the tournament, Kreutzburg left the following comment. "We're in the same boat. I've got stuck in Sao Paulo, Brazil for 2 days due to the weather. Because of that, I lost an airplane to New York. Hopefully, I'm gonna be able to arrive tomorrow at 5 a.m. in Atlanta. Best of luck, man." As there were no direct flights from where he lived, Kreutzburg had to travel to Sao Paulo in Brazil in order to catch a flight up to New York, where he would then have to catch a connecting flight south back down to Atlanta. But as he described, due to some terrible weather, he'd already been stuck in Sao Paulo for 2 full days, with uncertainty still floating around for his next 2 flights. With this news, the community was still hopeful that Kreutzburg would be able to make an appearance. However, exhausted and haggard by the ordeal, there was still a chance he could show up, and that would be way better than nothing, even if he understandably could not perform at his peak. Kreutzburg's bracket had an absolute demon lurking inside of it. Blood Diamond was a US West player sponsored to attend the event, and finally being unburdened by lag himself, proved to be a top-level threat. Kreutz was slated to face Blood Diamond in the finals of their pool should they both make it past the first few rounds, and despite all signs pointing towards a Kreutzburg disqualification, in the 11th hour, when Brawlhalla could stall no longer, he appeared. Pool B1 finally began, with Kreutz as the #1 seed getting a bye for the first round. Winning his first match, he moved on to fight a skilled player in Arkin, who he was also able to best. And so facing him next was Blood Diamond. And this match would prove to be the next step in the tragedy of Kreutzburg's Worlds experience. This match was supposed to be streamed. Every pool's finals were, after all, from A1 all the way to D6. But as I'm sure you've been able to gather, this one was not. Kreutz would be the only pool's finals to not appear, the only regional qualifier to not be featured on the big stage for his friends at home to see. This was not deliberate. The first Worlds was a manic whirlwind of production, where volunteers with cardboard signs and 2-minute lunch breaks had to organize hundreds of competitors and ensure the broadcast always had a set ready to go. Perhaps because of the uncertainty surrounding Kreutzburg's pool, or a slip in the cracks from TOs torn in a dozen directions at once, Pool B1 would play out in the shadows. And as such, Kreutzburg's performance would remain a mystery in the public eye. It's no surprise that many people still don't know if he even made it to the event. And as we'll find out later, that void of information would give life to unsubstantiated theories and a complete discrediting of South America as a whole. But back to the tournament. We know very little about how this match between Kreutzburg and Blood Diamond played out. What we do know is both players gave it their best shot, but Blood Diamond was the one to clutch it out with 2 last stock red games in a row. And this bumped Kreutzburg down into the losers bracket, where he'd have to fight Arkin once again. Arkin himself was on a win streak, but Kreutz snuffed it out and squeezed by into top 32. Unfortunately, he would have to wait another 5 hours before playing again, and his first opponent was on fire. Skibuster, a newer talented NA player, had just knocked out Doppy, someone expected to get top 8 or better. Needless to say, Skibuster was an extremely skilled player, and this underdog defeated Kreutzburg 2-1, leaving the South American qualifier with a final placing of 25th at Worlds. It's not a bad placing, but this is Kreutzburg we're talking about. He was expected to be around the same level as Tiger and Kyler Alice, if not better. He was a giant question mark that only grew as his absence became more and more obvious. And when he finally did show up, most people didn't even know. As day 1 of competition came to a close, the South American fans were left completely puzzled. One user wrote, "Me and a lot of other South Americans were waiting to see him play in the stream, but he didn't even appear in the 10-hour stream, even though he was the regional qualifier winner." Agreed, spent half my day watching the stream waiting for Kreutz to play another set, with a reply stating it was the only reason why I tuned in. It wasn't all support though, as Kreutzburg certainly had some detractors. Kreutz was very disappointing. He didn't appear on stream because he lost very early, earlier than any other regional qualifier. He was the first of them to be eliminated also. It looks like the Brazil server has very weak competition because it sounds by the results and his opponents that he got outclassed badly. To watch Kreutz play, you're gonna have to watch it in Brazilian tournaments without Americans or Europeans. Otherwise, it looks like he'll get beaten in pools again and won't appear on the stream. To anyone simply looking at the results, you couldn't entirely blame them for holding this opinion. After all, the other regional qualifiers did perform incredibly, and yes, Kreutz did lose quite early in comparison. But that wasn't the full story. And for the first time, maybe ever, we saw Kreutzburg snap back. After everything he's done to build up his scene, after being nothing but kind to everyone he encountered in-game and in the community, he popped off in his own Kreutzburg way and, justifiably so, explained his experience. I don't know what you are talking about. I've got so many delayed flights and landed just a few hours before the start of the tourney, tired as hell because of the 10 hours of flight, and days without playing, and not that much warm-up. What do you expect? Even in these conditions, I lost both games to Blood Diamond on last stock in Red 2. Also, I had to wait 5 more hours until I could play Ski Buster, which is a good player, then exhausted by that time, and the results were 2-1 for him. I don't blame you that you couldn't see all of that, but you are very wrong about the skill cap. I played some customs with LDZ, Twilight, and Logic, and we had some close matches. Maybe Kreutzburg, with perfect travel and perfect luck, would still lose the exact same matches that he did. Maybe he was simply outclassed. That could very well be the case. But it's unfortunate that we don't live in the world where that could be proven one way or another. It sucks that his sparring matches with the 1v1 champion LDZ, the 2v2 champion Starlight, and the top EU player Logic are now lost to the ether. It sucks that he would have to defend himself after a grueling multi-day ordeal just to book it to the venue and still give it his best to compete right after arriving. And most of all, it sucks that someone this dedicated to Brawlhalla and its community from its earliest moments all the way to its biggest day yet was robbed of his chance to show his worth to the rest of the world for reasons entirely out of his control. Kreutzburg, for no fault of his own, was robbed of his dream. And that is where I thought the story would end, that somber, depressing note. As someone who was there at BCX 2016, I didn't even know Kreutzburg made it to the event after all. I never met him, I never saw him play, and I never realized the unfortunate truth behind his disappearance. But the fact is, Kreutzburg did make it to BCX. It was in the last minutes, but he made it. And while I myself didn't meet him to give you this account, in doing research for this video, I found out that other people certainly did.
I mean, I met Kreutzburg, and he's such a nice guy.
I finally got to meet him on the second day. I think I talked to him and just hung out with him for like over 2 hours. Dude is so nice. He was so excited to like meet everybody, and he didn't really know who everyone was, so he wanted he needed someone to introduce him to people so that he could get some games in. I showed him that bug where when you switch really quickly between the characters, they take other people's poses, and he thought it was the best thing ever. He took pictures, and he was like, I'm gonna show everybody this when I get back. Man, I love Kreutzburg. He is such an awesome dude.
Anyone who's traveled knows just how exhausting a simple flight can be. Now add on a multi-day delay without being able to rest, an utter lack of practice in this brand new LAN setting, and a set of highly skilled opponents, and even the best of the best can sometimes exit at 25th. But just because Kreutzburg's tournament run was over, didn't mean his tournament had to be over. He made the most of the opportunity, hanging out with international friends he'd known since the alpha days, grinding out sets with the best of the world, and hopefully basking in the moment for as many hours as he had left. Kreutzburg deserved to be there. He earned his spot fair and square. You can only imagine how bittersweet it must have been to walk those event grounds. The hollow feeling that comes with losing a competition, giving it your all and coming up short, made even emptier by it feeling out of your hands. Kreutz's dream seemed dead that day. There was no hope for him to win Worlds, and being the best in South America, no hope for them to claim the trophy either. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and now it was gone. Kreutzburg slowly phased out from the Brawlhalla scene after BCX, and let's be honest, you can't really blame him. After such a devastating experience, with years of build-up only to be snuffed out before you even get your chance, you couldn't blame anyone for losing the passion they once held so close. Looking through Kreutzburg's post history tells us most of what we need to know. While there's no direct answer to why he stopped playing as much, the frequency of his comments and engagement with the community slowly faded away until one day it dwindled completely. Brawlhalla changed a lot in the following year, 2017, with the biggest development being Dash, a movement mechanic that completely revolutionized combat going forward. Kreutz was actually a vocal supporter of this mechanic, saying how he hoped the feature would go live before that year's South American Regional Qualifier. Ironically, it was a mechanic that countered the style of play Kreutzburg had become known for, but as shown just a year ago, he had the ability to change up his approach on the fly and adapt to shifting tides as necessary. 2017's South American Qualifier actually did feature Dash as he wanted, and it was the first qualifier to do so. Kreutzburg also did enter one of the only 2017 tournaments of his with data I could find. But whether it was his passion slipping, his practice dropping off, the new Dash countering his playstyle, or a myriad of other potential factors, Kreutzburg did not repeat his immaculate performance from 2016, and ended the event at 17th. Not a bad placing, but he was no longer the king. And this is the last tournament I can find in Kreutzburg's entire career. Despite him congratulating Fiend, the eventual winner, and saying he couldn't wait for the next tournaments, I can't find any evidence that he entered anything after this. Attempting to find any kind of tournament profile from his regional qualifier result in 2017 leads to nothing, indicating the only tournament he entered this year was the qualifier. I'm not entirely sure if that's correct, but with such little evidence and previous tournament websites leading to 404 errors, my search was forced to end here. In a way, it would be the most fitting ending there could be for Kreutzburg's story. He hit the highest peak of his career at the regional qualifier, and now, in the twilight of his competing days, entered the same event one last time as a kind of swan song, giving up his title to the next player. For a storybook ending, that's not half bad, but there's still one big piece missing. You see, I mentioned the winner of 2017's regional qualifier, a player named Fiend, who would carry the flames of South America's scene for years to come, even making a decently sized splash at LAN before Brawlhalla shut down live events in 2020. And Kreutzburg, just 4 days after the regional qualifier, made his final submission to the Brawlhalla subreddit, a video titled Brawlhalla Training Session Number 1, Kreutz vs Fiend. The video is now down due to some copyright restrictions, but we could still analyze this moment and its greater significance as a symbolic passing of the torch to the new best in South America, as a moment of reflection, how Kreutzburg had helped build up this entire scene, and now it had finally surpassed him. But we don't even need to do all of that, because Kreutzburg did it for us. A commenter wrote, "With all the talk about EU versus NA, I secretly hope Brazil will roll into BCX and dominate." To which Kreutzburg replied, "Yeah, you know, there's always a certain favoritism, but since our last year, our scene has gotten bigger than ever. I mean, we have more skilled and consistent top players right now, but we don't play as much as NA plays with EU and vice versa. That may be an issue for Brazilian players. Let's hope for the best." Kreutzburg didn't win Worlds in 2016. By the time 2017 rolled around, he had already departed from the community and left his scene in the hands of the new generation of pros. so I can't help but wonder if he knows what happened next. How, in an unprecedented explosion of skill, effort, and talent, South America dominated the 2023 World Championships, claiming both first and second place. How at 2024 Worlds they went back-to-back, rolling into BCX and dominating. I wonder if Kreutzburg knows how the seeds he planted nearly a decade prior by investing in his region and cultivating the growth of younger, passionate players would result in South America becoming the strongest Brawlhalla region in the world. Kreutzburg's story is one of tragedy, of wanting something so desperately and falling just short of reaching it, of never getting that chance again and slowly fading away from the very thing that gave you such hope. But perhaps he can look back at his 2016 experience more fondly now, with time healing the wounds as we all hope it does for our own. Perhaps he can see it for what it was more clearly, a once-in-a-lifetime memory that he earned fully on his own merit. It's easy to look at playing video games and talking to online friends as vapid and fruitless, and by the same token, stupid to care so deeply about results in a video game tournament. But this is our lives. This matters to us, and it mattered to him. It's something he was willing to put everything into, which not everyone in their lifetime can find, and find success in doing so. That's something truly special. So perhaps Kreutzburg's climactic collapse after years of preparation does not have to define his entire story. Why should it have to end in tragedy too? Because through the beginning, the peak, and the darkest depths of his career, one thing proved unwavering. One thing so pure, it continued to live on past his own departure from the game. How could we say this story has a sad ending when Kreutzburg's dream came true? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.